Hello. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I'm Sarah Farrow-Crowley, Director of Alumni Relations. It's wonderful to see so many alumni, faculty, staff, and students. We have lots of students at this event tonight, which is especially special for all of us. I'm honored to introduce the 7th virtual conversation that we've had in this year-long series. It's the Alumni Conference on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. So more than a year ago now, we partnered with alumni volunteers to develop opportunities to best foster open dialogue together. We put out a call to alumni, faculty, and staff. And as a result, we have a passionate and committed group of alumni volunteers who are part of the planning committee, who put all of our previous panels together, and of course this panel together this evening. It's my pleasure to read the committee list to you, and I'm going to have to read it because there's a lot of us and I don't want to miss anybody. So here we go. Carl Archett Jr. is class of 2016, Stephen Corus, class of 2008, Paula Davis, class of 76, Stacia Emanuel, class of 93, Jessica Grujan, class of 2009, Dr. Valerie Hayes, our Chief Diversity Officer, who's here this evening with us, Horace Knight Jr., class of 2003, Aisha Lee, class of 2014, Ed Marshall, class of 92, Irvin Moreno Rodriguez, class of 2015, Daniel Nugent, who is our Chief Development Officer, Executive Director, Stockton University Foundation, and my boss, Dr. Ashley Roberts, who's our moderator this evening, and Beverly Vaughn, beloved professor of music at Stockton University. I think most people know her. So I'd like to thank the planning committee for all the work that they've done to develop these conversations, to promote tonight's event, to recruit amazing panelists, and in some cases even to be amazing panelists. Tonight's conversation is focused on the intersection of race, gender, and systemic obstacles for women of color with a distinguished panel of Stockton alumni and staff. I'm going to give a few housekeeping notes and then I'll turn things over to our moderator. Tonight's conversation will be moderated by Stockton's Executive Director of Student Affairs, Planning and Operations, Dr. Ashley Roberts. Dr. Roberts, thank you for being here with us tonight. And I'd also like to thank our distinguished panel. You'll meet all of them immediately, just following a few reminders. Everyone who has come into the meeting this evening, you're on mute. This is to ensure we don't have distracting background noise. During the conversation at any time, you have the option to unmute yourself, raise your hand with the Zoom feature to be recognized, and our moderator will recognize you. We have some questions prepared by the planning committee to begin the conversation, so we'll start with those. After that, if you have a question, like I said, unmute yourself, raise your hand, and you will be recognized. It's now my pleasure to introduce tonight's moderator, Dr. Ashley Roberts, Executive Director of Student Affairs, Planning and Operations. Dr. Roberts, I turn things over to you.
All right, well, good evening, everyone. I'm honored to serve as your facilitator this evening. I am still relatively new to Stockton, and I feel like if you relocate during COVID, you get to really say you're new because everything was virtual my first year here at the university. I am in my second academic year with Stockton. I've been here a year and a half total, and appreciate the opportunity to engage with alumni and the students that we have here tonight to really expand my connection to campus. I was saying to Sarah as we were and the panelists, I work for students, but not with students. And so the opportunities to make these connections is really dear to me. And this topic is also one that's dear to me and a frequent one, specifically with my Black women friends and colleagues. For this conversation's purpose tonight, we are speaking broadly about women of color, but I invite you all, both panelists and our guests, to speak from your racial or ethnic identities. I now have the privilege to introduce you to our panelists, and I will name each of them, mention their current title, Stockton graduation year, and then they will share a few words about their role and what brings them to the panel this evening. So I'll name all of them and then we'll go with the introduction. So Amina Bay is class of 1990 at Stockton University, and which was under the previous name, I'm sure at that point, Executive Director of Newark Emergency Services for Families. Erica Dorenzo, class of 2005, is an educational consultant, and Dr. Pamela Thomas Fields, class of 92, is a faculty member here with the School of Business. here at Stockton University. So Amina, why don't you get started and tell us what brings you to the panel, and then Erica follows suit, and then Pam, you can go next.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for allowing me to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity. What brings me here is that even though it's more, there's not a lot of women, especially Black women, women of color, that are leading organizations and agencies that are front facing in the community these days, that are leading nonprofits and anchor institutions in urban centers. And so for me to be sitting in that seat, I've had a lot of experience of being the only Black woman in the room, one of the few Black women in the room, and having to really try to help pave the way for other women of color to come into the area that we're working in right now. So I really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation.
Right, Erica?
Thank you for having me here tonight. I'm a 2005 Stockton graduate. I'm very passionate about giving back to the community. I look at being an educator as a form of activism. It's a way in which I give back to my Black community, to communities at large. It's important for children, adults, anyone who's in the learning space to see people who look like them. When I think about how much representation matters, I've been the first and the only many times, whether it was a classroom, a meeting, or an opportunity to serve in a capacity of a job. And I think it just matters so much that your presence is there, and that while you're there, you're expanding the territory. And I like something that Tyler, the Creator, said a few months back at the BET Awards. He talked about throwing back the keys, opening the door and throwing back the keys. I like to think that I throw back the keys, you know, so that I can have other people come through that door and they can enlarge their territory even the more.
Pamela?
Well, thank you to you, Ashley, for taking the charge of having us in this amazing space amongst royalty and women that I have known over the years. And I appreciate for what you're doing. The challenges that we have today, and shout out to my students, Women in Leadership, Fall 2021. I know you're on there. And we've had many discussions of challenges throughout this semester. I'm here today to talk about possibly the educational challenges, the economic challenges, challenges that we may have as our community and family, and to bring it home, political challenges as we have as African-American women. Me being the first woman running for mayor in Atlantic City changed the game politically for me. And I hope this evening, what I can do is inspire, encourage young women, because I see the shift that's necessary of the old, and they call us old heads, and the youngins, to be able to open up a gateway for them. So this evening, I want to talk about some of the challenges that we have as African-American women on both angles, but those issues to the forefront, what we can bring and the opportunities are greater than we know. And I appreciate, again, this evening for this conversation.
Okay, we're going to get right to it. So I am going to start with our first question. When you think of your professional experiences, your life experiences, how do you think that those have, or how have they differed from white women as well as men of color?
Well, I'll jump in for that. It's I've never seen or experienced or had a conversation with any white man or woman that felt that they had to represent their entire race when they were in the room. But as a Black woman, if I am the only one, I have to represent the entire race. And we're treated as if we're monolithic people, that we all have the same ideas, the value systems, the same views on politics, religion, social, economic issues, and that's just not true. And so that's an undue burden. That's something that we should not be responsible for, speaking for every single person of color in the universe if we happen to be the only one in the room, but we have to also make sure that we have a voice. And so I've never seen that that happen with white women and white men, only with people of color. And so that has been my experience over the years, and I've experienced it over and over and over and over again.
So let me go back to some of the framework of the topic. In the workplace, although I teach at Stockton, which is my joy, I've been with city government for 25 years for the city of Atlantic City. And although, like most other women here, being in a room representing who I am has always been, for me, I had to go above and beyond. Although I never had expectations of people embracing or accepting me because I'm uniquely different. You know, I was born in a household where being different and speaking your voice and having your place was okay. So the challenges of being the only woman, whether it was work or in politics or just in the community, I never really let that do anything other than be the example for myself, my family, and the people that invested in me. I always went back to, you're not successful because you did it alone. There were people that came before you. There were women like Dr. King Farris, who during the time I was at Stockton, she was the only woman. So it was grace and dignity and a sophistication that you had to have. So although other people may have had their issues, or maybe they were saying things that felt comfortable for them, I never let that make me feel uncomfortable, because it was always about representation.
And being in politics, you know, to being the first woman to run and for mayor of Atlantic City, how have your experiences to that part of that question differed from your men of color counterparts, if at all?
Well, it really was, let me just circle back. Barbara Hudgens, rest her soul, was a councilwoman in our community, because I have to always go back to people who were examples for me that gave me the will and the tenacity to want to go further. She really wanted to run. It wasn't me that wanted to be the first person. Let's just identify that, because a lot of folks get too cute and they want to say it's all about me, or it was me first. It was her first. She was my mentor. Now we're going to get close to that. And I saw what the men were doing to her, and it was unjustly disrespectful and not fair. Although that didn't stop her or me being her mentee, seeing that change had to happen. So although there was a degree of possibly arrogance or uncertainty, because the male dominant, perception was women aren't ready for this space yet, she was able to create and have courage, a role for me, someone like myself, to say, if not her, then possibly me. So that's the space where I think the men did not like, but they respected in the end. It's not always about being popular. And that's what I had to learn.
Anything to add, Erica?
There's so much to talk about. I could go into an ocean of, I'm just taking everything in and I'm like, where to begin? So, to Pam's point, when we're talking about specific gendered stereotypes that Black women in particular can fall into, where it be, there's a play, if you will, a play on words, and a play that actually happens in terms of how it's performative, how women, Black women in particular, are deemed less credible. They're deemed to be capable of doing more work, not compensated, and not always recognized in the room, right? For their gifts and their talents, but their gifts and talents many times get exploited. So to that point, I just wanted to say that there is very specific sexual harassment that women experience, Black women experience, in particular, since we're talking about Mrs. Hudgens, who I'm familiar with because I'm also a graduate of Atlantic City High School. So I just wanted to throw that in there. So I've benefited from her knowledge as well. That's something that came to mind as well. The specific sexual harassment that Black women face in the work environment, and this kind of patriarchal twist, if you will, that even in city government that may be largely governed by other people who look like yourself, there is still the advancement of white supremacy, right? This cultural appropriations, cultural conditioning rather, of this is how we're going to behave. Even though we know it's systemically wrong, we're still going to benefit from this, right? And Mrs. Hudgens was a brilliant woman and capable and strong and a wonderful advanced educator. She was a woman in math and science when you didn't see many women in math and science, let alone Black women. So I can definitely see how she would have been in a position, unfortunately, to have been preyed upon by other men, largely who look like herself, who would benefit from painting her in a light that was less than stellar, less than who she was. So when I said I had an ocean to talk about, that's the one point that I was taking a deep dive on in my mind.
Yes, and I think this is a really important conversation. So like, I'm going to jump right in, right, to how has your experience differed? Because I'm not the type to shirk around race, and this conversation is about racialized experiences. A little bit of what you all talked about were working twice as hard. That was essentially the sentiment, right? Being the only person in navigating those spaces, but also not being valued wholly for the work that you do. One of the things that it prompted me to, so I took this conversation to my group chat. So the Black woman that I alluded to earlier, like my group chat, we talk about these things a lot, like our professional experiences in navigating spaces, specifically as Black women, politics are really a core of our conversations daily. And one of the conversations I didn't add to our formal questions was about the emotional labor, but one of the almost unspoken expectations of Black women in a variety of professional spaces, and honestly in their familial roles and other places, is to carry additional emotional labor. So how do you navigate those expectations or the tendency that we may even have from conditioning, social conditioning, to pick up the additional emotional labor in different spaces?
I think it's important to let people, you got to know your audience and yourself, and you have to draw healthy boundaries between what is acceptable and what is unacceptable. So I recently saw a TikTok with this young woman, her labor was being exploited. She made a presentation and the man kept speaking over her in the meeting. And then when it was her turn, she asked him to mute his mic so she could also share that those were her talking points, that he had stolen those talking points. And that is something that, when I started out in the work environment, you would take that on the chin. You would go home and talk about it with your friends and your family. You would take that on the chin. So I think the landscape of work is changing, and changing the thoughts of what looks like burnout, what was called burnout, to what really is exploitation, right? This sense of urgency and this sense of I have to navigate I have to own all spaces, right, is at the core of whiteness, right? It doesn't make room for Black and brown people. It doesn't make room for Black and brown women in particular, but it will go ahead and expand its clutches into your labor and take credit for it, right? And that is something that happens to Black women like all the time, right? And that's a tough spot to be in. Thankfully, the work environment is changing, and also the work cultures are changing, whereby confronting those challenges is necessary. Interrogating the thoughts behind those stereotypes, those racist tropes, if you will, is also a mandate. And also examining your own internal, I would say your own cultural conditioning, right? Because there's some things that, is a part of your conditioning. I was preparing to come here tonight and I was thinking like, well, what do I need to wear? And what do I need to do? And how much do I need to be prepared? And there's all these expectations. That's, again, a sense of urgency that we've been impregnated in our culture that comes from white supremacy, honestly, right? This whole sense of like, you can't be your whole self. You got to wear your clothes like armor, your hair like armor. You got to make sure that you're polished and you're spiffed up as much as possible. That is unfair, and it is a burden and a toll to feel that you have to pay in order to be taken serious, and in order to have, in order to be taken seriously, and in order to be valuable.
Yeah, I want to jump in what Erica was saying, because it is a burden, and it's in a space where, again, when we talked about having to be twice as good, we're always expected to accept less and to do more and to give more and to, you know, to be that mediator, the peacemaker, and to allow things to just go and not speak up for ourselves and not advocate for ourselves, not advocate for our people, not advocate for the people in the room, and the people who are outside of the room that are depending on us to be their voice, because we are the only ones in the room. And, you know, there's a tightrope and a fine line that we are forced to walk, because if you speak up too much, then you're aggressive, then you're angry Black woman. If you don't speak up enough, then you're passive, and then people walk over you. And so we're always, you know, jockeying back and forth to just make sure that we find that balance of productivity and effectiveness when it comes to voicing our needs and being heard and being respected and commanding it as opposed to demanding it. And it's a lot that goes into that. There's a lot of plotting and planning that goes into representing well.
We had a class on Tuesday, right? And we had a meeting. We had a reflection on that paper.
Sarah, are you able to mute that person? Thank you.
No, so that's, I just wanted to add to that point that Erica made, because it's very, very important. And it shows up every single day. And for, you know, for such a long time, we've just allowed things to go. But now we find ourselves strengthened and emboldened in a way that we haven't before, and supported more in a way that we haven't been before. But there's still a lot of work to do, you know, and so it has really been a struggle for Black women in particular to really stand firm and stand our ground, and to be acknowledged for the work and the contributions that we have made and continue to make.
So let me kind of circle back, because I think, you know, when you talk about the emotional part for women of color, we are just stronger than we know. I have faced so many issues with racism and, like Erica said, sexism and all the isms. But I have learned how to let my attitude be my power. There is a sense of when, you know, as an African-American woman, you should walk a certain way and have an attitude, because the power is within you. Emotionally, yes, we deal with things at home, within our community, whether our church, our workplace. And yes, stereotypes have always tried to identify us, but I've never embraced that. What I have embraced is loving being an African-American woman. That's the first thing we have to embrace.
Definitely.
Loving who we are. We're no good to anyone or anything if we, yes, identify the problem, but also work on it for it to better for ourselves and those around us. I never really had expectations of what other people would do or could do. You know, growing up in Newark, New Jersey, it was one thing that I learned before I came down here. You're either in or you're out.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. That's
right.
it. So I was filled with that at 17, coming to South Jersey, knowing that there was just a way of how I had to present myself. And so I think having, like I said, strong women in my world around me who were older, and I trusted them, who invested to take time to sit down and what we're doing right now, have the uncomfortable conversations. And sometimes there was racism that I probably came across and didn't even realize it because I was so about the mission and achieving. And I think moving forward, yes, it is one thing we can address that it exists. I hate to say this. I believe in my heart, and it's no offense to anyone, but we've gone backwards with racism, okay? Politically, I hate to say it, but it is what it is. And we have a lot of thinking to do now of how it's been damaged. The country is divided, and women now are in charge. And ironically, African-American women now are getting greater opportunities. So our challenges are not our opportunities. Our challenges are now when we have those titles, how it's going to impact our families and things that matter to us. That's the most important thing. Our emotions have to be strong, and so does our faith.
We are definitely going to come back to the politics of it, but I do want to point to something that Erica spoke of when I was younger in my career, you had to take that on the chin. So, and speaking to some of the students in the room, as well as others who may watch this later, what do you wish you knew early in your career or life that you now know?
Wow. What do I now know?
About
Then
navigating this world as a woman of color.
As a Black woman,
Black woman, yes.
I would say I'm magical. You know, I would honestly say that I'm magical and full of wonderment and amazement, honestly. And I wish that I had had that, constantly fed into me. It was something thankfully, it was inborn in me, and I just gave it to myself. That is why I know it's so important why I am in the room and at tables and in office spaces and any other place where my presence can be seen and felt, because it matters that someone sees you, hears you, and you embody what they can be, right? Because when I think about who I was as a young person, I always thought about, like, I would take pages of people who helped me along the way, like Dr. Previty, who I don't know if he's still adjuncts for the college, but he was a huge mentor for me. He was a vice principal at Atlantic City High School. He was the first person that was like, you really have to go to college. And he made me register for the early college access program through Stockton, right? So I'm grateful for that he saw that in me and he wanted me to have that, right? And I think about women like Barbara Hudgens, and I think about all the other people that I ripped pages from their books, just watching them in silence, but knowing that it mattered that they were present and that they were able to mirror and model as an informal mentor to me. That's what I aim to be, like formal and informal. When someone sees me, another Black woman, another Black girl sees me and they're like, I want to be that. That means the world to me, because there was a time I was the first and the only, and I was putting together all these pages to make me, right? And now that I get to go in the room and, as Amina said, you command that respect. You command that someone see you as valuable because you show up that way. You present yourself as a person of value, of integrity, as a great communicator and someone that can communicate the message that, like, being Black, being a Black woman is beautiful and it's a gift. It's an absolute blessing to show up in the room in that manner. And that's something that, I strive to be just on, like, naturally. I want to organically show up as Erica, who's proud of all that she is, everything that's made her, my missteps, my mistakes, and all these other accomplishments. I'm way more than my accomplishments. I want to be known as like a wholehearted, heart-centered, embodied person, that when someone sees me, they're like, that's activism and demonstration. That's love at work. That's someone who has their heart first when they're going into a room. To advocate, that's another important thing. I could go on and on and on about the power of advocacy. Like Dr. Previty advocated for me to register for Stockton, right? And how much that changed my life. You know what I mean? And both of my daughters have gone on to become graduates of the college. One graduated from Stockton, right? And I believe I can't remember the exact quote, and I'm going to paraphrase it, y'all, but it says that when a woman gets educated, she changes 3 generations, right? So like literally, you know, my daughters are changed, my grandchildren will be changed, and my great-grandchildren will be changed. I'm so grateful for that opportunity that I was able to take that love that was imparted to me and love on other people and show them the way as well.
So just so you know, Erica, I had your daughter in
I
my
know.
class, and she was one of the most amazing young women
Oh, thank you.
in my class.
Thank you.
And reason being, because she was free in who she was and remind me of myself.
Amen.
So where am I today? Totally legacy
Yes.
leadership. It is time to roll up our sleeves. It is time to get back to home rule. Whatever I didn't do when I was young, it's impossible to even talk about it.
Right.
But moving forward, we have so much that is waiting for us. I think that we don't even recognize. I mean, we're still in a pandemic. So quite frankly, whatever we do, it's impossible for any naysayer to have a disagreement. These are good times now for us as African-American women to rebuild and to redefine who we are. This circle of what we have, the panel today, this is power and strength like none other. So we take the things that we have learned within our journey, and I believe even the mishaps and the losses. See, I told my students, even losing the election, I still felt as a winner. You know, my dissertation chair, Dr. Sweet at Stockton, you know, she tells me all the time, and she's a mentor of mine. She tells me, you have so much of yourself, but just slow down, slow down. You can't say yes to everyone. That's something we need to work on. You can't be the all in all for everybody now, but you need to define and focus on all the talent that you have up until this point, because there's a demand for us now. We have work to do. So again, there's nothing other than the strength of the Black woman has been the strength for this country.
Absolutely.
And we need to recognize that every day of our lives. And it's not to separate us from anyone else, but we have to start understanding the power that we have. We still have not understood that. And until then, we still have a lot of work to do.
You bring up a point that resonates with me, and I think about the great women. I think about how Barbara Hudgens was a mentor to you, a mentor to me also. I think about Shirley Chisholm, who was the first Black woman to run for president in '72, the year I was born, and how that made way for, you know, Kamala Harris. And I think about all these, I even thought about Henrietta Lacks, right? I think about all the medical advancements that have been made because of HeLa, right? This woman whose cells were involuntarily taken away from her without her consent, without her family's knowledge, right? Literally, her cells alone are a life force. They have cured influenza, created the flu shot, AIDS advancements, infertility treatment, stem cell research. You talk about women, Black women being full of wonder and amazement, right? I mean, we're the life force. When we talk about Biblical Eve is a Black woman who comes from Africa, right? And we talk about that, we literally mean that these are the women who have not only paid in blood, sweat, and tears, but they have given us our magic, right? They've poured into us, they've nourished us, they've uplifted us, right? And when you think about the model in government, when you look at Black and Indigenous communities, right? Those communities were communities that uplifted women, and women were equal democratic actors, right? That is what we come from. That's not what we need to work towards. The only thing we need to work towards is advancing more and more of that, honestly. So I am also excited. I share in Pam's excitement, and I know for a fact that there's just more greatness for us to come. And it's important that people like Pam and Amina and myself and Ashley and all these other Black women that may be on here, that wherever you are, in whatever way you can, do whatever you can to be a presence in someone else's life, so that you're uplifting them and you're helping them become enlightened about themselves, and they're applying that knowledge in real time to how they're living their lives out loud. And that makes a huge difference. It's custom tailored for the person, for their community and their own lived experiences that they're aiming to have. You can make a difference with what you're doing, and that person can then apply that to how it's going to be most meaningful and impactful to them and their lives.
Yeah, and I mean, when I listen to what Erica just said, and even going back to what Pam talked about, I mean, she and I have shared experiences, growing up in New Jersey, and being blessed with, strong family ties. We share some Stockton memories together as well.
Yes, we are family.
But having that strong mother that instilled that in me, and when we talk about, what we wish we had known earlier and learned, I learned it earlier than most people, thank goodness, but still from the beginning, wish I had the full knowledge of my own power. And that's something that came along, but to know that I'm good enough. I'm more than good enough. I'm more than equipped. My education is good enough. My experience, my expertise, my knowledge, my intellect, it is enough. I don't have to constantly every day be on the proving ground and have to prove that I'm worthy to be in this room, to be at this table, and to be a decision maker. And that's the thing about, it's not just about to be at the table as a face, to be a thought leader, to be a decision maker, to be able to craft and develop and create and establish something that is meaningful and sustainable for ourselves, for our people, for our community. That is the importance. And when Pam talked about legacy, that was the first thing that came into my mind, because that's what this is about. We are now in the process of building a legacy for us, for our people. We have just gone through something so traumatic, something so creative. We have created all kinds of things out of this pandemic. This has been the most devastating and the most creative time of our lives. And there have been people of color, women in particular, that have led the way to this new space that we're in. And so when we talk about this exciting time, now we are healing and moving into a space where we create the narrative. We say how this goes. We chart the course, and we don't have to follow what was before, because we are now the ones who are leading, and there are people that are following us. We are the ones that came before. And so this is really a great opportunity for us. And we have the power. We have everything that we need to be successful in a very meaningful way for generations to come. And we just have to put it into action.
Yes.
When I hear you speak, Amina, I thought about Glenda the Good Witch, and how Dorothy, was like, I just want to go home. And she's like, girl, you had it all the time.
You had the power the whole time.
Yes.
You had
within
time, right?
Within you.
Yes. And
times.
I love the fact that there's greater power in you than around you, right?
Absolutely.
And sometimes, like, if you're watching people, right, or a Black woman in particular, you can literally feel the bubbling inside of her, right? The innovativeness, the ingenuity, right? It's like, how am I going to get this thing done, right? How am I going to produce this outcome? How am I going to manage all these competing priorities, right? And I think about Stacey Abrams, as a matter of fact, and I think, like, Stacey Abrams is like, God bless the Lord, let her win gubernatorial win this time, please.
He is the GOAT.
Yes.
But courage, just having the courage.
Yes.
Look at Ashley, just having the courage coming to New Jersey.
Yes.
Ashley!
Yes. Yes.
Ashley!
Yes. Thank you for coming.
And we thank you. We thank you.
Ashley, we love her.
Hey, Tom.
Oh.
Hey, guys, it's
Hi.
talking about legacy. What a tremendous thing to see you three. I don't even know what to say. I was trying to hold my mouth. Y'all
Thank
are
you.
my legacy. Not only
Yes,
mine,
you
but
taught us
everybody.
all.
Go down the
You
list,
did
right?
good.
Diane's on the call. We can
Yes.
go down the list, right? We can go Pat. Oh, and good golly, we can go down the list. But talking about legacy, I'm one proud mama today.
Yes.
Oh, that's
Mwah.
sweet.
Mwah, so good
I
to
didn't
see
love
have
you.
the I
So
didn't
good
have the
to see
pleasure of
you.
having you, Professor Vaughn, but I'm a graduate of the college, and I always admired you from a distance. I talked about these informal mentors that I have. I count you as one, right? You're very much like a peacock, and I'm a Leo, right? So I appreciate a peacock. No, I do. I mean that in the nicest way, right? I would see you from a distance, and you'd be dressed up, and you'd have your sparkly hats
Yes.
on. And I'd be like, see, that's someone showing up exactly as herself.
Yeah.
Right?
Unique.
And you were always bubbling over, right? And that was where you were consistently, wherever I saw you on campus. So I appreciate your presence on campus. And I
Well, I'm
appreciate
telling
being
you,
able to
yeah.
even, know that such a woman like you exists in a
And-
college.
Well, I can't even give you an A, but you did a good job, okay?
Thank you.
And that's when we talk about representation, like we had someone like
That's right.
Beverly Vaughn that we could see.
And others,
we
and
could be in
others,
our
right?
class. Yes. You,
That's what we're talking about, the legacy.
Yeah, you modeled that for us.
Uh-huh.
You know,
Definitely.
and so we were so blessed to have you. Thank you so
And so
much.
what's exciting for me, guys, is I hear you because we're talking about continuing the legacy. Now, sometimes we do it day by day, don't we? And that goes for
Definitely.
Ashley and other people. There's a whole group, Ashley and Nordia. You guys got to meet them. Just exciting, but continuing the legacy. Because and who we are as African-American women, the strength that we have. Amen.
Amen.
I
Amen.
let me shut up and go back on mute. But I'm happy.
Oh, I think about, to your point, Professor Vaughn, I think about Mary McLeod Bethune. I think about Sojourner Truth.
Yes.
I think about Harriet Tubman. I think about the quiet, steely force of Rosa Parks, who I think is
Yes.
totally downplayed, right? She's a quiet leader, right? But so much force behind her, an educated woman, a well-versed woman, a knowledgeable woman, and a brave woman, right? And because she wasn't out and she wasn't speaking, people didn't always think that she had the intellect, right? Little did they know that she planned, right, with the NAACP, right, to be there as an intentional person, right, to offer herself up, along with other people just like Claudette Colvin and other women who've gotten downplayed just the same, right? I'm gonna give her her flowers though. She's passed on. I'm gonna give Mrs. Parks her flowers. She came from a family of activism. Her grandfather chased the Klan out of town, by the way. And she went to a college for high school because there was no Black public high school for her. So, I mean, this is a woman who is a force to be reckoned with, who history truly does not recognize all the dimensions of her brilliance, right? And I want to say that there's so much more to Mrs. Parks. Even I want to give a shout out to Joanna Robinson, who is the Black woman who it was her idea to stage a bus boycott. Let's have a one-day bus boycott and see how successful it is. And then we're going to stage it for a year if it's successful. And it was 98% successful. So let's give it up for the ingenuity, right? The genius of Black women.
More to come.
Yeah.
More to come.
Amen.
So one of the things that you all have, I think every one of you has mentioned, is a seat at the table, word to Solange. If you have a seat at the proverbial table, in actual like professional terms or however you took your steps, how did you get there? Like, what has that journey looked like? So, Dr. Vaughn mentioned, like, and everybody's mentioned me taking this leap to New Jersey. Like, this is a senior level role for me. And because mentorship's so big for me, it's like, I talk to anyone about like how I made a leap from associate director to an executive director, senior administrator. But I wanted to, in my career and plan to be a vice president for student affairs, have this seat at the table to, again, not just work for students, but work with students, but work for students in this grander way. But it's not always the easiest journey or the easiest seat to have. So how did you get there? I have some follow-ups, but I first want to know how you got there.
I think Erica mentioned it in the beginning about owning your intellectual property and claiming it, and not shrinking and not allowing someone to usurp your power and to take credit for your intellect and for your creativity and for your work and for your product. And it can be done in a way that exercises quiet power, as we talked about, or you may need to be a little more assertive, but you have to show up and stand in your power and push forward. And that's the only way, because a closed mouth don't get fed, my grandmother used to always say. And so you have to stand up for yourself, and you have to push forward at all times. And so when you talk about seat at the table, again, who was it? It was Shirley Chisholm that says that, if there's not a chair for you, bring your own chair.
That's right.
And now we're at the place where we're building our own table. We don't need to sit at someone else's table anymore. We've created our own table. We have our own table. We got Black Table Talk now. We don't need that.
That's right.
So we're doing our own table. But yeah, it's about showing up, taking ownership of your work and what you've done, and not allowing anyone else to dumb down who you are, and diminish your value and your contributions, and you push that forward on your own.
So I think for me, whether it was, working at Stockton, or, community groups involved in my, my party, or teaching on campus, like most things, hard work, commitment, tenacity, knowing who you are, being prepared, the preparedness of when you are representing as an African-American woman. I'll go back to this again and again, examples and representation. I was able to get a seat because, I wasn't going to, take no for an answer, but I knew the mission was something that I had to continue, because I felt that, like most things in life, I believe I really don't have control of the next steps, but God is in control. I truly believe that He has put me in places and circumstances, good, bad, or indifferent, to represent as an African-American woman, but also be strong enough in my voice where people would listen. It's one thing to be able to come and not make a difference or impact, and then, you come back and you say, you want more, you want more, you want more. People don't take you serious. The only time people take you serious, and I hope my students are really, really listening, is when you show up and you show out.
Yes.
Bottom line.
Definitely.
Bottom line.
I think it's important. Pam, what you were saying got me thinking about the power of one, and how like one person matters, right? And so we know there was a multitude of people behind Mrs. Parks. She was the one who came forward at that particular time for a number of reasons, right? And we think about what it means to not only show up, but to be a representative that is someone that will inspire others, motivate, enlighten, uplift, encourage their spirit even. And I think about the power of like Black women, period, right? The mothers during the civil rights movement who was sending in their extra money, donating shoes for the bus boycott in the 1950s. I think about the steely force of, may she rest in peace, Mamie Till Mobley, Emmett Till's mother. I think about, wow, like what that woman went through, and still rose in the process, went on, became college educated, became an educator, and encouraged other students, not only to follow in her footsteps, but to live a life that would be legacy impactful, what you're talking about, and also honoring themselves, right? This is a woman deeply impacted by violence. And I remember listening to her one time talk, and she said she used to talk about the Blacks down South and said, that's their problem. Speaking of segregation and specific racialized violence. And she said, now I know it's the problem of all of us, right? And so like how the power of one person not only is meaningful and impactful, but it does carve inroads for other people to say like, hey, like I either like that or I don't like that. And they can take a stance, and then in their own way, they can help advance that cause.
Well, this all sounds well and good, but being at the table and making your way to the table, even before you get into those decision-making spaces comes with a lot. Showing up fully as yourself can come with a lot. We've got stereotypes, assumptions, being shut out of spaces, never being given the opportunity to be in the in crowd, being privy to, you know, the pre-meeting conversations, the deals that were done before you ever had a chance to voice your thoughts, a number of things. So how do you navigate the racialized aggressions and stereotypes? So I decided not to call them microaggressions because aggression is aggression. And when they happen so often, it's enough to throw your day and your week. Like, did that just happen?
Right.
And throw you off, even, you know, disrupt, you know, kind of your weekend or whatever that may look like, and creep into your thoughts. So how do you navigate those? How do you address them in real time? What does that look like? From the practical sense of, you know, people who may need to, you know, like, how do I do that? You tell me to do it. How does it happen?
You got to learn how to call a thing a thing. And it's not always easy. It's not always comfortable. But everyone has their own way, because we're all, you know, different people and we have different personalities and different way of addressing things. But you have to let people know, one, I heard you and I see you, and I want you to know that I can see how you see me, and that's unacceptable. And whether it was something that they said, something that they wrote, something that happened in a meeting, and it doesn't have to be loud or boisterous, but you need to let people know. And sometimes it's something as simple as, excuse me, you know, can you repeat that? Explain that for me. You know, tell me more about that. If it's a generalization about Black people, Black women, or something like that, let them know that I'm not going to let this fly. I'm not going to let it, you know, pass over. I'm not going to brush it off my shoulder. You are going to have to stand in the foolishness that you just did. And you're going to have to explain yourself, and you're going to know that I am not someone that you can do that around or to, and you are going to have to really be mindful of how you treat me and how you address me and how you attempt to disrespect me, because that's not something that I will tolerate. And people need to know that. We have to put people on notice, and the more we do that, the more that they will start to begin to correct their behavior.
I learned from, and uniquely, I think I talked about this earlier, the shift of old and new. And I'm learning so much from young women today. A young woman from our community, her name is Shamika Harvey Cotman. She ran for at-large. Neither one of us were victorious, but we still are in the fold, and we're still making substantial changes in our community. She said to me, and she said this, "You control the narrative." And it's true. I listen to our young people. They want someone that's real, and they can pick through who's real and who's not. And they want someone just to do what's right. So when we simplify what is in society right now and narrow it down, everyone, and we say this all the time, wants the same things. The challenge now, and we go back to challenges because that's what the topic is about, is who's going to take the lead, because even leaders should follow. That's going to be our challenge. You know, uncomfortable, that's a part of leadership. Uncertainty, that's a part of leadership. You know, African-American woman, you know, taking a little and making a lot, that's a part of our life. That's just who we are. Where do we go from here? We have to start now planting the seeds and creating now opportunities for those that are waiting for us. That's pretty much where we need to focus. It is time to sit down and start talking about realistic programs and even some of the things that we did before, possibly bringing them back, because some of the old ways of how we did things, they worked and they work well. So this is the space now that Black women need to really start identifying what did work, maybe rethink it, rebuild it, but also now talking about what is necessary for, again, our communities, for our families, no particular order. But my main concern is wealth. Because if we don't have wealth, ladies, we have some major problems.
I think to your point, Pam, just talking about creating those specific, if I'm understanding you right, specific opportunities that open up advancement for Black women in particular. It's not enough to paint broad strokes and say this is a women-centered program, incentive, if you will. It has to embody the uniqueness of Black women, the struggles, the challenges, and even the gifts and talents that we bring to the table as well. Otherwise, it's not aiming to benefit that group.
Right.
You can't benefit the whole group by doing it one way, right? You have to think about the uniqueness of what challenges, and like I said, the strengths that Black women also bring to the table. If I'm understanding you right and building off of what you're saying.
Well, I think overall, and Ashley, again, the question remains, and we have to say this, even in the most uncomfortable circumstances, because she was trying to get a feeler of what we do, I guess, in controversy or uncertainty. Is that pretty much?
I mean, the actual aggressions, like being shut out of conversations, or being like, I specifically have been called aggressive.
Yes.
Unfortunately, by Black men in work. You know, how do you navigate those situations? Or when people try to, you know, think you're out of your place, which has certainly happened to me, with white women allies who, until they think I'm out of my place, we're, you know, sisterhood and solidarity. Right. So
again, I navigated them through doing what was right. And also being honest and upfront, because if you build trust, you know, irregardless of what someone may have a difficulty because of, you know, my skin color, issue with maybe, you know, my braids, an issue of how, you know, when I speak, I may use my hands. All of those things are things that really, you know, people can have them. But as African-American women, we should embrace them. We don't have to conform or change. It's okay to be in uncomfortable situations. But if people know who you are, who you're representing, 9 times out of 10, you can fill the room where people will listen. And they will. And after they are listening, then they start feeling that they could also contribute towards what the conversation is building on. So it's within, like I said earlier, all of us as women. It's time for us to navigate and to plan the next steps.
Well, I'm listening to you speak. I think about what came to my thinking was words matter, and how much it means, and I thought about what Ashley was saying, this kind of policing that women face, Black women in particular face at the work environment, where you're deemed to be aggressive, and to Amina's point, being direct, call a thing and a spade, like Iyanla Van Sant would say, right? All right, but what do you do if you're not in a position that you feel empowered enough to do that for a variety of reasons, right? So I'm thinking about that person, you know, that young woman or that person who's been out of the workforce, who's now getting back into the workforce, and they have a variety of vulnerabilities that make them second think, not guess, second think whether that would be the right thing to address that. You know in your heart what the right thing may be, but it may cause you other things. Like we know that women are paying a tax for motherhood, for taking care of family members. We know that women, Black women in particular, are making 64 cents on the dollar less than white men and less than white women, right? So when you talk about these jobs being in demand, is that factual or is that a fantasy, right? And so it depends on how much the person feels like they may have the opportunity to speak and how much they feel like they could lose if they speak. Because you know in your heart what's right, you know what I mean? And that can be very challenging and dicey about, and dicey about when you're choosing to do that. Because there's always proxy wars beneath the surface with words, right? And we see this show up in conversations, even when we're talking to white-bodied people. You say protest and they may say riot, and you're like, it's not a riot, it's a protest, right? These are proxy wars happening beneath the surface. The same thing happens with gender, right? And the same thing happens with the intersection of race and gender. And the person who's in that position may not feel like they can afford to really speak on that thing. And that's what I think Ashley's talking about, like women who are empowered, all of us here are seasoned to a certain degree, but that doesn't mean that we haven't at one time felt like, wow, like maybe I shouldn't say that, or I know my voice should speak up and not be an echo, but there've definitely been times that you were the echo in the room because you knew you had something to lose. And I want to hold space for that person and those people who are having those experiences too, for a variety of reasons, right? If not always they're not strong enough to do it. Maybe they're not in a position to do what they can at the moment, what they would want to do,
Right.
But I think we've come a long way. Not to disagree with you in a sense, but I think me personally and professionally, 25 years in city government, it's not the same for me in the conversations any longer. So there is a slow growth, not astronomical, but for me personally, as an African-American woman, 25 years later, I have seen some small development for us in our roles and our voices, our opportunities and door openers. The issue is, again, I believe, and again, when people kind of can pick through what they know your agenda is, and who are you really representing? And we have to understand that. I know I'm representing an African-American woman. I get that. Do I feel that I have to be in a setting when it's uncomfortable for me, that I have to, scream it out, yell it out? No. I am there to represent. And yes, it could possibly be uncomfortable, but even in the midst of it being uncomfortable, I can still rise above and get the job done for my community, for the people that are necessary and the reason that I'm there. It's never a point where, again, I think that, we can dwell on it. We have to now identify it, know that it exists, but I do believe that things are going in a direction where, again, we talked about where we create less of that for our future, because now we have the roles and we have the leadership capacity, we have more control of the setting.
So what I'm hearing, you can do a direct confrontation, and confrontation does not mean yelling. I think people shy away often from the word, but I mean, name it. Ask that person for clarification, like,
exactly.
Make sure that they name it, or you can decide to ignore it or deal with it at a later time and try to keep the focus on the purpose of you being in a particular space. Where is what I'm hearing. And to Erica's point, which is really critical, is also taking into consideration why a person may or may not speak up in a particular way at a certain time. People have a variety of vulnerabilities, economic vulnerabilities. Somebody could make a good salary and still have economic vulnerabilities. Perhaps they're supporting other people than themselves, and so that risk is bigger than them, and not just what it may look like on paper to be shut out of a space by speaking up or holding other people accountable. And so it's convenient to assume why, but, and I pulled up just to get my numbers right, as of March 2021, the economic disparities in gender wage gap for women of color. So Latinas are the lowest paid compared to white male counterparts on the dollar, 55 cents. Native American women, 60 cents per dollar. Black women, 63, 64 cents. Asian American Pacific Islander women are paid as little as 52 cents. And of course, that is not disaggregated by nationality, because we know when we go into national ethnic identities that range certainly can vary. And so from a pure numbers fact, dollars and cents, there can be difficulties in doing that. And so decisions have to be made conditionally and circumstantially. I do want to open up space before I move on to other questions to the audience to see if there's anything that you have on your mind, whether it's something that we've discussed that you would like to bring back around, or if you have a question that's not yet been posed. And you can raise your hand and I'll call on you. Okay, I'm not seeing anything, but if something comes up, again, please remember to raise your hand. Click the button to raise your hand for questions or comments, and we will take those, okay? So I'll resume back. Mentorship came up a bit here. Erica especially spoke about that. So I wanted to talk about what role have mentors played in helping you navigate being a professional in your skin and in this world, and how have you cultivated those mentors and sponsors in or out of your field? And I also wanted to make a reference to possibility models. So Janet Mock, who's a journalist and trans activist, spoke about possibility models, and that has always, and maybe it's 2015 or 16, has always stuck with me because it sounds like what Eric was speaking about with Ms. Hudgens, I believe, seeing these people and with Dr. Vaughn, seeing these people from a distance who help you see, you know, who you can be. They may not be mentors, they don't have a hand or a personal relationship, but seeing them in their different spaces is something that helps you navigate or believe where you can be or who you can be. So how have these different roles played a part in your ability to navigate the challenges as a woman of color, if at all?
So I had a friend, I believe in having friends at different levels, someone younger, someone older, someone well-seasoned. So I had a woman who was my mentor, and it was early in my work career, and she just started to mentor me on clothes, right? And she was just talking about this having this wardrobe capsule that I could pull from. And that really helped me to be able to build on that so that I would know what to wear and in what space to wear it in, right? And moreover, it was important for me because it made me have, it helped me to have confidence in how I was presenting myself and then how I would communicate, because I'd made that investment in myself. So I thank her for doing that, that work, exposing me to that. So I'm grateful for that. In terms of other mentors, I've had a lot of informal mentors, people I just watched from a distance, and I was like, yo, like that is everything, right? Like, you know, Alice Walker, you know, Whoopi Goldberg. I just love Whoopi Goldberg. I love looking at the way she has transfigured, right? From being Miss Celia in The Color Purple to what she is today, right? Looking at the way that she continued to show up for herself unapologetically and not explain anything that's happening in her life or not. She just shows up. I appreciate that. All of these people that I've been exposed to, whether it's like on the screen or in real time, and I've observed them from a distance, has made a huge difference in my life. Dr. Previty, as I said, was another major influence in my life because, you know, he saw things in me and he would just pull me out of class and like talk to me about it. And I was just like, great, I'm out of class. This is fantastic. But it gave me an opportunity to interrogate my thoughts, you know, and it gave me an opportunity, as Amina said, to really see my worth, to really assess my worth. Like, oh, okay, you're capable of going to college, you're capable of being a lifelong learner, and you deserve to be on that campus. Always, and also as a child, I had a relationship with Stockton growing up around here, always going to see like the Nutcracker at Christmas time and being on campus. And being able to be on campus was a blessing for me because it allowed me to envision myself actually living on campus or going to school on campus. I didn't go to school living there. I was a remote student, if you will, but I definitely knew it was possible for me to be on the campus. Like I was worthy of being there. I was smart enough to be there and I needed to be there. And I was in the lit program and there were only 7 Black students at the time, believe it or not, in the lit program. There was only 7 of us, right? So it mattered that we were all there and that we were in those program. We were in the program and we were in those classes, right? And then the next year, I believe the number jumped, right? Because someone saw us and was like, yo, I like that, right? Books saved my life. I always say that books literally saved my life. So someone else was like, you know, I appreciate you standing up saying books saved my life. Right. And then they went ahead and they followed. And I would like to think that there's even more people in the lit program now, you know, because of the work that we did, you know, when I was there 20 years ago. And in terms of sponsorship, honestly, I wish I'd had more sponsors. I definitely have benefited from mentors. I have not been able to truly benefit from having a sponsor, someone that would speak well of my gifts and talents and present opportunities in rooms when I couldn't be present. That is a double fold blessing that I honestly wish that I'd had in my career. But I aim to always do that for other people because I know that that is super important, that it matters that you're in the room having those conversations, that you're advocating for that person, that you are glowing them up, so to speak, and that it matters that they're getting the chance to be seen in a light that will open up doors for them that they couldn't automatically open up for themselves.
So Ashley, when it comes to mentors, and I'm glad you addressed this question, my mentors are why I'm here today. They were honest with me. They were supportive of my career and a lot of decisions. Even the things within my professional development, they helped me select choices. So mentors pretty much helped me develop over the years. And why I say that is because we all need them. Where I am today, and I have to go back to the space of today with young people, I totally believe, and I said this to the young women in my community, if mentors aren't coming to you, you need to select your mentors and you need to go to the women in your community that you can identify, community work, whatever, that you have possibly, you know, some similarities and interests that they can help you with. You now, young women, have to go and find your mentors if you cannot find one in your workplace, in your setting. We're here. There's a huge disconnect, and this is what I do love about Stockton. I'm a founding member, and I'm gonna brag a little bit about the Women's Leadership Council that Stockton has, our women's leadership. We have identified on the university that there are young women on campus, Black and white, because, you know, I have white mentors and my white mentors invested in me just like my African-American women that were mentors. I have to say that because my white mentors, I understood more about their culture and their dislikes and things also. There was a merging of both of the cultures together. So that was a benefit for me. The African-American women who were mentors, there was a little special added touch because they saw something in me down the line that maybe they didn't have an opportunity, like I mentioned with Mrs. Hodges, to pursue, but instill all of the talent and things within me when it was my time to shine. And I believe that it's now that, you know, they helped me develop. So what happens now? That shift again. We have to now start looking at these young women to start giving them leadership capacities where we can merge together the things that they can contribute and vice versa. But I can tell you, without mentors and without women, and specifically African-American women within my community and where I came from, if they were not in my life, I wouldn't be Dr. Pamela Thomas today. They were relevant and significant.
No, I absolutely agree. And my mentors, they took me in the room with them. They sat me next to them at the table and allowed me access to the conversations and to the meetings and to the planning and to the strategic planning of different things and working on projects. And so I got to see firsthand. So I was extremely fortunate. And so I make sure that I'm intentional about that in my work today. And so I've been a mentor for years. I do that. I take young women with me. I bring them into the room. I introduce them around. I make sure that they get a chance to know people and to have different experiences that will help in their growth and development, because it's very important to pour into people and to invest in them. And that's what my mentors did for me. And so that's what I continue to do today, not even just women that I work with, in my agency, but women in my community, women in my family. It's very important that, that we pay it forward and pass it on. And that's how we build, and that's how we grow, and that's how we sustain. And going back to what Pam says, that's what the legacy is about.
Now, how do people, you talked about just kind of going to those people, but that can be intimidating.
Mhm.
And I've seen women of all ages be intimidated to seek mentors, to ask for that in that formal sense of a mentor. So what are your tips for seeking and then cultivating the mentor relationship?
Now, Ashley, that's what you did to me. It's not intimidating. We're not going to have that conversation. You came right to me, dear heart, and challenged me. So it's happening.
Well, I'm a different person.
Yes.
That's never been a problem for me. I ask for what I want and what I need. But I also mentor a number of professionals of, again, different ages, peers as well. I learned this term at a conference, friend-tours. So mentoring across with your peers, something Issa Rae also talks about, mentoring, to the person next to you that's going to come up with you. I know something about this area you may not know. I don't let my friends, if I can help it, interview for jobs without prepping, because that's what I do. So I'm like, sis, we all going to eat, but you're not going to go interview for this position and nobody's looked at your resume. Nobody's helped you with the negotiation. Again, my group chat is often into like, they offered me this, how do I have this? But that is not always simple. For people, particularly young women, and I work on a college campus, they see plenty of women on campus, or many women on campus they might admire, but it can be challenging to ask that professor, that faculty member, that alumna who they met or saw speaking in this panel today to follow up and say, I'd love to have more of a conversation. How do they initiate that? What should that look like? And then how do they maintain that relationship and keep it cultivated?
I think sending an email first. I think sometimes if you take the time to write something out, that's something that you can practice. You can take your time and make sure it's right, because for people who are not comfortable, doing that cold approach and just walking up to someone and, to write it out and to write a request, to request some time with them, you can take the time to cultivate your words and to really make sure that you express yourself in a way that you want it to come across.
And Ashley, I beg to differ, because young women today are very aggressive. I don't feel that. I feel that there's a lot of young African-American women, if they see an example within their workplace or within their institutions, they will approach you. They will. I see this younger generation is ready and on fire and just needs someone to open up the door for them. It's there. It's there. So like Amina said, email, more of these sessions. You're opening up the culture center. That's another space. Have different spaces, but let them know you need to now start looking at someone to assist you, help you, guide you, show you. It's a whole lot that's with mentoring, but I don't know, Miss Ashley, you did it. I think there's a lot of you out there.
Yeah, and again, it's not to me that I'm exceptional. Like, there are young women. I have a younger sister. She's more of an introvert. She feels awkward. Just helped a colleague with her daughter who's very bright and at an Ivy, who feels very alone. And I was like, I have a colleague there. Perhaps we can connect. She has not followed up because she feels so awkward about it. So again, it's not that it's an all or nothing proposition, but that particular, to specifically ask for help in any kind of way or to be unsure is how do you approach that? It's easy to be like, oh, those shoes are cute. Where'd you get those from? But it may be harder to say, hey, I really could use some help with X, Y, or Z when it comes to something that may be a little bit more vulnerable.
But you answered it. You meet people where they are.
But how does the person seeking the mentor to do that and maintain that? And Erica, you do extensive mentoring, so I would like to.
Yes,
So I'm thinking about how mentoring is a two-way relationship, right? And this, as we talked about the great Issa Rae, who I love, right? And this reciprocal relationship with mentoring, right? Thinking about who's best positioned to help you and then how you are in return best positioned to help them. To Amina's point, I think it's a great idea to write an email and keep it very brief. And you can either invite the person for coffee at a time that's best suited for them, or you can tell them 3 talking points that you're looking to gain insight from them on. And that's specific, it's targeted, it's scalable, and it's manageable for people, right? If you can keep your mindset just focused on how can I best come alongside of this person and gain insight from them and not add to them, but give to them and also receive some in return. That's the nature of reciprocal relationships. Coffee and coach chat could be important to begin to formulate how that career development and support could take place, right? And then also shaping a relationship by having that very brief email, just saying, hey, like, I've been watching you and there's some things that I would really love to be able to speak to you about. And here's a couple of them. When do you think you could make some time on your calendar for me? I'd really appreciate that. And then knowing in return that you're going to be giving to them too. I think about Terry Williams, who was the first Black woman who had the most successful PR firm in New York. And her beginnings was that she was, a Harlem social worker. And she by chance met Miles Davis one day when he was admitted in the hospital. And she came up to him and introduced herself as a fan and was like, I am just so enamored of you. And then they became friends. And she started having conversations about how she always wanted to go into PR, but she had an MBA, right, with like this social work degree. And she was like, well, how am I going to advance? How am I going to build on that? And through cultivating a relationship with him and listening to his insights, and all of her other lived experiences, she made the transition to the point where one day she was actually at a party, saw Eddie Murphy, knew he did not have an agent and was like, listen, you need to listen to me and I'm going to be your agent. And she walked away from that party an employed woman in PR where she had never had that job before. So she was emboldened and she was empowered within herself, and the power of the relationship that she also had developed with Miles Davis, I would like to think helped her embody the confidence needed to approach, such a heavy, Eddie Murphy at his height. We're talking about raw Eddie Murphy, right? Just imagine how intimidating that would be to walk up to him and be like, I'm going to be your manager. I don't have any experience, but I'm going to be it. And she did it.
So I'm hearing from both of you, to an extent, you have to be brazen. You have to be bold. at least bold enough to send that email, and the email gives you time to think through. And so you also have to be thoughtful. Why are you seeking this person out for mentorship? Again, we're talking about these challenges that women of color face. You may need somebody to help you navigate through a particular space. It may not be forever. It may be, to get to grad school. I see that you went to X school. I'd love some guidance in that, but it may be a longer term. I have a number of them that I actually matched with through a Facebook group. And sometimes the timing's not right, and it's not always personal. A person may not have capacity. So like for me, once I talk to somebody, I'm always like, what are you looking for in a mentor beyond maybe our initial conversation? Because I have to make sure I have the capacity. If you want somebody to talk to every day, I may not have the capacity, but it's monthly and text here and there, I probably have that to offer. I certainly had to decline somebody as a mentor, honestly, because they really needed a therapist for the things that they outlined. And I really had to say, I want you to really look for therapy and then come back and think about the other ways that I might be able to support you. But the things that you specifically need help with are beyond the scope of what a mentor, myself or anyone else, should be able to provide for you. And so that thoughtfulness is really important, and willingness to learn. I scanned for questions and we didn't get any. So I want to get to the last, I think, rich question, and it's going to be tight on time. But we've seen an uptick in women's voices being heard politically, though I think that I would say women of color, again, across the racial and ethnic demographics, are still not as elevated as they should be. As the 2022 midterms approach, how can politicians make women of color constituents priorities in their policies?
I think healthcare is important. I think the voting rights are important. How to do that is listening to the voices and specifically coming to the communities. You don't live amongst us per se, let's say, right? But you can come and you can visit, you can listen to us, and you can take that information back to craft meaningful and impactful policy when we're talking about healthcare, when we're talking about voting rights, when we're talking about even just being visible in whatever capacity that Black women are being visible in your organizations or in policy making.
Yeah, I agree. And Black women have to be integrated into the conversation, have to be a part of developing the policies, and really be just at the foundation part of it, not at the end. I mean, at the beginning, in the beginning of the process, have to really be a part of creating and developing and establishing, whatever the platform is, in order for it to be really representative of the community that they're trying to serve.
Great points.
I think on a personal stance, just women supporting one another. I mean, we still have a lot of the same issues. Education, you mentioned healthcare, housing, it goes on and on and on, the same issues that exist in our communities, all right? Supporting one another is the key. Talent is there, potential is there. I tell young women all the time, you don't have to have a degree to run for office. There's so many misconceptions. There's so many, lines that are just not really identified of just come as you are. They say to come, to a place of worship as you are. But, those should be some of the things that we say everywhere we go, and support one another. Once we start doing that, ladies, we take away, the personal, the jealousy, the envy, the things that we have amongst one another with women that are unnecessary. We got to be honest with this. We have to build one another up, help one another develop, even have uncomfortable conversations like today, have our stand and believe in what we believe in, but stay in our lane and let our lane grow to help others along this journey. But the day we support one another wholeheartedly, not with, your own personal agenda, because we have to stop this, our own personal agendas, we have to do it for human rights, women's rights, all the things. We are a priority. We have to prioritize ourselves, but we cannot do it alone. But once we start supporting one another sincerely with our heart and soul, we will have a greater opportunity down the line. And I'm hoping, again, when I go back to young women, that the bright future is that they go and they don't just stand for anything any longer. No, you should not have less pay. No, you should not have schools that are crumbling, that are giving you books that are outdated. I mean, we can go on and on and on and on about the things within our community. But the power, again, ladies, we have. The issue is whether or not we're going to apply it.
So on that note, we are at time, and I really appreciate all of you for serving as our panelists. I've truly enjoyed listening and learning from and with you. So thank you so much for being here this evening. Thank you to all of our attendees for your participation. I hope that you heard something that resonated with you, that you can take away, that you can apply, with your peers, with other, for future conversation, that you can continue to learn and grow from. So either help you continue in something or it's helped spark something in you. For more information about the conference and our upcoming sessions, you can go to www.stockton.edu/DEI. And we appreciate you all. Have a great night, and we will see you in the spring semester with more.
Thank you. Bravo, everyone.
Good night,
Have a
everyone.
wonderful holiday.
Yes.
Be well.
Thank you, Sarah.
Be
Thank you
safe.
so much for the
Sarah, once
invitation.
again.
On behalf of Stockton University Development and Alumni Relations and all of us, everyone here, thank you for joining us. Thank you to our moderator. Thank you to our distinguished panelists. Everyone have a wonderful evening.
Thank you again. Be
Sarah,
well.
where can we see this again? Sarah, where can we see this again?
Oh, this will be on the stockton.edu/DEI website.
Okay, by
Yes,
tomorrow?
within the next couple of days, it'll be posted. Several of Professor Field's students asked me about where they could check out the viewing for later. So yes, so that's
great.
where you'll find it.
Wonderful.
All
I have
right.
the
Thank
best
you all.
students in the land.
I believe that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Good
all.
night,
Ladies,
everyone.
it was a pleasure
Right.
speaking with you
Likewise.
and serving on the panel with you. God bless you all. Have a
Yeah.
wonderful, happy
Pleasure's
holiday.
mine.
You
Same
too.
Good to
you.
see you.
Good night. Thank you,
You
everyone.
also.
Good night.
Good night.